March the 3rd, 1942, dawned as usual, and at about 10 o'clock in the morning, down came Mac Miller's Lockheed 10 from Darwin on its way to Perth, and Jimmy Woods was the captain of the aircraft, and while they were refueling and so forth, I can remember Jimmy Woods deciding whether he would take this spare landing wheel. There was a main landing wheel kept at Wyndham as a spare for the Lockheed 10s, and he was cogitating whether he should take that down to another place further down the track and locate it down there. And while he was doing this, another RAF Dragon aircraft, DH-84, came in, A34- something or other. And anyway, Jimmy was decided not to take the wheel, and they all got in the aeroplane, and Jimmy went to take off as normal, and I went over to her radio, and while I was just waiting for Jimmy's departure signal, to my amazement, one of these RAF people went racing past their radio towards the bush, and he was really going at a rate of knots. And as there was nothing to attract one in that direction of the bush, I thought I'd go to the door and see what it was all about. And as I went to the door, I could see this line of Zeros coming, Japanese fighter aircraft coming straight for the aerodrome and air radio. And it so happened that the noise of the couple of receivers going, I hadn't even heard these Zeros coming. So fortunately, I decided then that I'd follow him also in the same direction, because I could see these couple of Zeros in line there coming towards us. So I can quite remember I had a white shirt on and white shorts in those days, and white socks. And there I was trying to crouch down under a very small little bush with a few leaves on it, and these Zeros were going overhead at about 40 feet, I suppose, and you could see the pilots very clearly, because those Zeros had a very high seat for the pilot, and he used to sit up well above the edge of the aircraft. And I don't know whether they never saw me or not, but I can tell you I never wore a white shirt and white shorts after that. Anyway, I could peer up and look, and after a few runs, the old DH-84 looked all right. I thought, oh, they've evidently missed it. But there was a big stack of drums. There was up to 2,044-gallon drums of aviation fuel that had only been shipped into Wyndham about a week or 10 days before this, maybe a bit more than that. And anyway, I could see there was flames over amongst these drums, and a further look, about 30 seconds later, and I could see a wisp of smoke coming out of the old DH-84. So the pattern of attack was quite interesting. I think there was about 9 or so of these aircraft altogether, and one of them would strafe east-west, and the other one would strafe north-south, and there was always somebody just about on the target at all times. And I don't know how long they were over the target, but the hangar was on fire, and the RAF Dragon was on fire, and the fuel dump was on fire, and amazing as it was, their radio wasn't on fire. And looking back on that, it was quite surprising. There was 20-centimetre cannons and 20-millimetre cannons, I should say. Not 20 centimetre, 20-millimetre cannons, and the ordinary 7-millimetre shells. And for every one cannon, there were two 303 or 7-millimetre shells. and one could walk down the aerodrome in both directions and pick up one of one and two of the other at regular intervals all the way along. And these 303s equivalents and 20mm cannons had gone through the air radio hut. Fortunately, they'd gone through fairly high, and when I say high, they were high for the equipment. They were just too high for the equipment, and they went through the fibro cement sheeting and right through it, and those larrikin lamps or hurricane lamps that I mentioned were minced up because they were hanging up in the rafters of the air radio hut. And there was a 600-gallon water tank out the back, and of course that had been spurting water everywhere, and that had holes right through it. But fortunately, not one bit of the air radio equipment was damaged. So I came back and put it all on the air again, and contacted Jimmy, Jimmy Woods, and fortunately Jimmy had just got out of sight before they came into the area. So, but he was very, very lucky. If Jimmy had waited another 5 minutes, he wouldn't have had an aeroplane to go home in. But I remember him next time I saw him saying, he said, "Well, why didn't you tell me when they were there?" I felt like saying, gee, I had more to do than to tell you. You were already away, and telling you wouldn't have done you any good anyway. So there we are. But that was the first raid on air radio, and as I say, there was this big dump of 2,000 drums of 2,000 44-gallon drums of motor fuel, and it was interesting to see those as they start to heat up, and the bottoms would blow out, and the whole 44-gallon drum would go into the air about 150 feet, and of course with tremendous flames, and it was a real burnt earth situation around that area after it was all over. It was very interesting to see, though. They had a gully nearby, and some of the chaps had jumped into this gully, and when they saw that the fuel dump was going up, they thought the fuel might run down into the gully, but it dissipated much more quickly than that. One interesting point came out of it, and that was that there was enough red band oil and green band oil to run my motorbike for years hence. I had a motorbike there on loan from the meatworks to me after a while, and to get up and down to between the 6 Mile and air radio, and the meatworks very kindly loaned it to me, and so I was able to use the green band and the red band aviation oil for that, and also the same thing as far as petrol was concerned. Another interesting thing was that there were some petrol drums on the tarmac, and they were these heavy drums with ribs around them. And as the hangar went up, the pressure inside them lifted the lid, but it wasn't enough to, there wasn't enough air got in to burn all the petrol, and there was about half to 3/4 of a drum of petrol left after the fire had gone out. So there was plenty of petrol for running a motorbike left over from the fire. I think the RAF chaps that were there that had just arrived. From what I recall, they were there for another day or so, and they sent down, I think, a Hudson from Darwin to pick them up and take them away. All that was left of the DH-84 on the tarmac was, of course, started to catch fire a bit, but embedded in the tar was thousands of little brass wood screws and nuts and bolts and stuff like that, and there certainly wasn't much left of the DH-84 at the conclusion of the raid.